be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. So this story of transfiguration, one of the wildest stories in the Bible, probably. One of those peculiar stories, a little challenging from our modern point of view, you might say. I mean, what do we do with these supernatural kinds of occurrences of Moses and Elijah appearing and disappearing and Jesus' face shining like a nuclear reaction? As I read and reread the text, something came to me. Remember, the weirdest things come to this preacher's minds on occasion, but anyway, remember that Steven Spielberg movie? Now this is way back, 1977, so way back. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Y'all remember that? Thank you. Thank you for the sound effects. In that movie, Richard Dreyfuss has an encounter with extraterrestrial beings in a great scene at a railroad stop. Suddenly this light from above shines and everything goes crazy in his pickup truck. And ever since that moment, he is filled with this obsession. He doesn't understand what it is or why, but he has this vision of this place. And in an earlier scene in the movie, Dreyfuss is sitting down to dinner with his family and is suddenly overcome with this image that he doesn't understand, and he says this means something. This is important. The transfiguration story of Jesus and the one that Moses had up on the mountain, they mean something. And I think they're extremely important for the living of our days. As one has said, this is kind of like a close encounters of the Jesus kind. Now it's been said that a picture paints 1,000 words. So pull out your bulletin there and look at the picture on the front of the bulletin, an interesting, wild picture by this artist, Raphael. Some think it was his last painting. It's a depiction of this whole scene that we heard read from the gospel this morning. A scene that's full of turmoil and chaos on one hand, and this brilliance and clarity on top of the mountain. The essential question today is not, did this really happen? You can go with what you want to go with there. I'm not going to argue the point with you. But Mark and Matthew both, and Luke, describe it kind of the way that Raphael painted it. But what does this mean for us today? It's clear that Mark's interpretation of its meaning to the disciples is that it's meant to be our validation of Jesus. Jesus had just talked with the disciples a little earlier about how the Son of Man must suffer many things. He was not going to be the Messiah of popular expectation. His way was going to be a way through suffering. So in this text, we see the glory on the mountain and the pain down in the valley, inseparably intertwined. We need the mountain, don't we? To face our own sufferings and the sufferings of our humanity. We need the mountain for the valley, because most of life is lived where? In the valley. We need the mountain, but we can't stay there. This experience of the mountain gave Peter, James, and John a great memory to return to. As someone today said, you still got sand in the middle of your toes, between your toes, as a memory of the experience of last week. They had this memory on the mountain. It was a high hour of vision which the disciples could trust forever. And I believe that it says to each of us that we must trust our mountaintops. keep our times of clear vision as the stay in our mind, because we will need that vision to call back on. So I say it again, we need the mountain. I love that verse. I lift my eyes into the hills, from whence cometh my help. You already know this about me, so I'm not giving you new information, but I love the mountains, whether they're in Puerto Rico or whether they're in North Carolina. Those Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina, now they're hard to beat. There's this one spot up on the top of those Blue Ridge Mountains called Beacon Heights. It's near Grandfather Mountain. One time when I was going through some really foggy times in my own journey, I went up to Beacon Heights. It's just a half-mile climb, but it's a pretty strenuous half-mile. You get up to the top of that rocky ridge, and it looks out over the beautiful mountains. Raw beauty. Now, I didn't have a transfiguration experience that day up on top of that mountain. In fact, it was downright mysterious, kind of like the transfiguration was. But I needed that mountain. I needed that spiritual energy to be able to live my faith once again in the reality of the valleys of human existence. So come, brothers and sisters, come with me to the mountain. See Moses and Elijah. But here comes the cloud, and now we only see Jesus. God's enfleshment of love and beauty. You and I probably could use a fresh glimpse of Jesus right about now. So Peter, James, and John got this fresh encounter of the Jesus kind that day. And guess what? Old Peter wants to stay on the mountain. Remember Moses, he stayed on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. But Peter just wants a couple more days on the mountain, hanging out with Jesus in this mystery of God's love and grace. In fact, Peter said, it is well that we are here. In fact, let's build 3 booths, tents to live in, to commemorate this day. Let's stay on the mountain, because this is good. But one of the gospel writers adds, for he did not know what he said. In other words, Peter was just babbling mountain kind of nonsense. Peter wanted to make this temporary experience permanent. And I think the church has probably struggled with that all through our history. We have these great experiences, kind of like the day we became an open and affirming church. It was a great day, and we want to hang on to those days. But we have to come down from the mountain. We have to come down from the mountain, from the service that we had with our Muslim brothers and sisters when we stood with them. We have to come down from that mountain and do the work of the valley. Because staying on the mountain blocks the possibilities of life. Too often a person moves on everywhere else in their lives, but in the area of their faith, leaving his or her religious thinking behind, pegging his or her spiritual experience at a point way back in the past. I have people in their 50s come up to me and say, I remember when I was confirmed. Boy, is that going back, you know? Like nothing's happened since then, right? We put our faith way back sometimes. And therefore our faith fails to grow, and our view of God's world is stunted. So if this is the case, may we take this Lenten season that's coming up, that starts Wednesday with Ash Wednesday. Maybe we should take this Lenten season as an opportunity to move off the old mountains into the desert and struggle with Jesus once again, and maybe even give ourselves the permission to fall in love with God all over. Maybe that's part of what Lent's about, is our opportunity to let God love on us, and an opportunity for us to fall in love with God again. Back to Raphael's painting. Raphael shows powerfully the striking contrast between the top of the mount and the bottom. Above the beauty of that high vision, and below the tragic need and suffering and impotence of the disciples. The mountain must make a difference in the valley, or it's just cosmic waste. When we're touched by that presence of God, when the power of God's light and love shines in and through us, for psalmists in a worship service, or a song that you listen to like earlier, those times where we're literally on the mountain, or those times when you're watching those ocean waves come in and imagining that God's love encompasses us with the mighty roaring sea. But before we wrap up today, we must take a look at a couple more things in the text. They come off the mountain. The disciples are asked to cast out a demon. The Father, will you please cast out this demon from my son? But it says that the disciples cannot. Now, they've been able to cast out demons up to this point. What's the deal here? The Father says, I asked your disciples, Jesus, to cast this demon out, but they couldn't do it. And then Jesus kind of, like Jesus on occasion would do, he kind of just went off on things. And Jesus says, you faithless generation, how much longer must I be among you? It's almost like Jesus is saying, I need you to be doing valley work. Didn't the mountain mean anything to you? Then at the end of the story, and this is the most intimate part of the story to me, at the very end of the story, after the disciples have come down from the mountain and they haven't been able to cast out this demon, it says they go to Jesus privately. And they ask Jesus, why? Why couldn't we help this person? Why couldn't we heal this person? Why couldn't we minister to this person? And Jesus says something in such simplicity. He says, this kind can come out only through prayer. Now, don't hear me say today that I'm saying if you'll just pray hard enough, everything will be cool. Everybody will be healed if you'll just pray hard enough. That's not what the text is saying, I don't think. It's just reminding us that we need that deep source of energy and strength that only God can give. We need it in our lives. Jesus was just reminding them that maybe they needed to reflect back on the mountain a little bit longer. And that intimacy that they had with Jesus on the mountain. That one-on-one time with Jesus, so to speak. I guess it really is all about Jesus. For you and I to enflesh God into our world, we must pray. We must commune with the Maker, the source of all good things, the source of healing and hope. To have the close encounters of the Jesus kind in our daily life, we must acknowledge our need for Jesus, for the Spirit of the living God, or we too will be impotent. No power to drive out. No power to heal others. No power to give hope and to encourage. Some of the leading activists of the 20th and 21st century have always reminded us that they had to go to the well sometimes because they would get dry. And they had to have a source of energy, of spiritual energy. And that was the case for Martin Luther King also. Remember that night before he died, he said, "I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind, like anybody. I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about it now. I just want to do God's will." And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as people can get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man, because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Martin Luther King had been to the mountaintop, and it made a difference in his valley dwelling. He had a clarity of purpose that the mountaintop can give. He had the glory, the live encounters of the Jesus kind. And because he had been to the mountain, he was able to prophesy to our society. He was able to march. He was able to get into the grit and grime of humanity and be a change agent. Brothers and sisters, come to the mountain with me one more time. Let us see Jesus once again. And then let us come off the mountain together, hand in hand in prayer, rising above the impotence of our society, and let the mountain with Jesus give us clarity of purpose. Oh, how we valley dwellers. We need some mountains, but we cannot stay there. Lent awaits. Inner struggles with our own shortcomings await. A struggle with fleshing out this new, wild, crazy kingdom that Jesus talks about. We go to the mountain and to the valley with Jesus. Thank God we have been to the mountain. Brothers and sisters, join me in the valley. And my prayer is that our mountains make a difference in our valleys that are ahead. Amen and amen.